Asleep, man. Been up since.
Hey, welcome everybody to another edition of Inside the Command Center here on the Big Douglas Show, where we attempt to get you as close to the organization as we can. Today, from the Team 980, Kevin Sheehan is my guest. Kevin, what's happening, man?
What's up, Doug? How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Always appreciate the time. Kevin, you've done multiple different radio shows. You've got the podcast. I'm curious, you've done these things with a partner before. You're doing it by yourself now. Do you have a preference?
Yeah, I much prefer working with somebody. Always have. That's why my podcast, when I do it 2 days a week with Rivera, I love doing that. I love doing, the podcast with Coolie. He comes on during football season once or twice a week, depending on his schedule. And radio, like I've got a really good producer who's good on air in Denton. He's outstanding, but I've always preferred working with somebody much more than working alone.
I hadn't planned on bringing it up, but since you mentioned it, I'm curious. Do you think is Coolie one of the guys that you think will be more active with the organization once Dan is out? Is that why he has been kind of away from the scenes for a while?
Nah, I don't think that's it.
Okay.
He's got a life out in Wyoming. He's got a big ranch out there. That's kind of home for him. I think that, if there'd been an opportunity to do something in the organization, he would have, when he was still here, he would have gone for it. But I don't think it has anything to do with Dan being there or Dan not being there.
We're 1 year into the Commanders now. Is it growing on you? Was the name? I know the name. I know you didn't want to move on. I think it was. We all knew it was inevitable that was going to happen. You just don't like Commanders? You would have preferred football team? Where do you stand 1 year in on the rebrand?
I don't know, Doug. It just, from day one, it felt like an expansion team for me, landed in town. It still feels that way to a certain degree. But, when the season comes around and it's September and, they got a team and they're representing the city and, my job is to follow it closely and to talk about it. And I found myself this year when they got back into contention, getting into some of the games. But I don't know that it was just the name. It was a slow burn for a lot of us over a long period of time where, the life was just, year by year being sucked out of us by, an owner that, for the most part ruined it for everybody. The name, I know a lot of people that will never, ever, they profess that they'll never be back with the name being lost. I don't know that I feel that way, but I do feel like it's not what I grew up with and what I, invested, and I say invested, that's, it was not like a big investment. It was so natural because I was from, a small child indoctrinated into Redskins, burgundy and gold. And my father was a massive fan and everybody in the family were massive fans. We had season tickets. So I went to all the games. But it's felt different for a while now.
When's the last time you've been to a game?
God damn. I mean, so I probably, I didn't go in 2020 and I didn't go last year and I didn't go this year. So it would have been 2019.
It's interesting. Some years ago, maybe it was way back when Shanahan came. I remember you used a word and it's always stuck with me that when the fan base becomes apathetic, it's much worse than when they're angry or when they're excited because then they just don't care. Do you think we were heading towards apathy before the announcement came that there most likely would be a new owner?
Oh yeah, I think we've passed apathy. We've lost 2/3 of the fan base. If you know the numbers of what's been lost from a revenue standpoint, season tickets, sponsors, television ratings, etc., 2/3 of the people that used to care passionately are beyond apathetic. They're gone. Now, will they come back? I have no idea. That's that time will tell. I think a lot of them will never be back. I think a lot of them have moved on. But Twitter's never a really good representation of like real life.
Really?
2/3 of what we had even 10 years ago during the RG3 season, they're gone. They've been gone, on a slow burn. And then certainly, the name loss and a lot of other stuff in the last 3 or 4 years that kind of accelerated in loss. But will a winner bring them back? I don't know. I mean, I think Dan being gone is number one. And everybody that's associated with that organization, whether current or former, will tell you that the number one challenge has been in trying to build anything has been Dan. Dan is toxic. No one wants to do business with him. The few that are out there every Sunday and the fraction of what used to be the television audience just loves football. And some of those people are hardcore fans. I'm not knocking those people and the loyalty they've had. But Dan has to go. None of these investigations, none of these lawsuits matter. It's not a market that's viable at a high caliber NFL level with him as the owner. And hopefully we're going to get that.
Do you have a gut feeling on who the next owner will be?
I don't. I just have a gut feeling that the process is moving forward, and kind of an informed opinion or thought that it has been moving forward, and it's going to be an expedited process. And part of that is because a lot of the bidders were vetted out during the Denver process,
right?
But he has proven to be impulsive as a businessman, and you never know. You're like, what if he doesn't get the number he's looking for? What if the Mary Jo White investigation doesn't come out with anything conclusive as it relates to him, which is a possibility? Would he be kind of, reinvigorated at that point? Because I don't think deep down he wants to do this, but I think financially they have to. And I was told like 2 months ago, they're resigned to their situation, which is it's time. They got to move on. The league doesn't want them. The fan base doesn't want them. And financially, they're on the hook for all that money that they borrowed to buy out their, previous shareholders. And a stadium isn't going to get built with any kind of assistance from any of the jurisdictions as long as he owns the team.
There's no doubt about it. Do you think with a new owner, they've got any chance to get back into DC?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I hope that's the case. I do. Yeah, and I know that there's been things written that, it's the Department of the Interior, and there are a lot of people down in that area of RFK that would be dead set against it. But the only chance, I think, of getting back to DC is a new owner. And I think that would be huge that would be at the top of the priority list if indeed, we get a new owner is, get to DC, build a new stadium there.
It's funny you had mentioned that. I've long said that if ever there was a heel at the last minute to say, no, just kidding, I'm not selling, it would be Dan Snyder. But I just wonder at this point if, like, the rest of the owners or somebody hasn't said to him, listen, it's time, you're going to do this. Don't make us force you to sell the team, be the first person to ever be forced. So it seems more likely than not this thing is going to happen. Do you have an idea? Do you think they'll be ready by the owners meeting?
I hope so. I mean, it sounds like Jay Glazer had something over the weekend, right? That suggested that, by the end of March, it could be done, which then brings up the whole thing, would the new owner come in at that point and clean house and try to, start anew? It's kind of late to do that. Who's really available? I think that's where some of the Rex Ryan stuff came from over the weekend with Sean Payton. Right. Is the idea that if it got done at the end of March, maybe Payton could come to Washington. But I don't know. I think more likely than not, it happens at the end of March. But we have Ron Rivera and the current staff there for at least one more year.
It's interesting that I have heard, and I believe this from people around the league, that with good quarterback play, the roster itself is a 10 or 11 win roster. It will be interesting to see if they can stiffen up the offensive line a little bit, if they get any kind of good quarterback play on a Sam Howell, who I would guess is the opening day starter. That's what you believe, isn't it? That Sam Howell will be the guy?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what to believe when it comes to Howell. I mean, he's intriguing. I mean, we've seen one game. You're right. He was taken in the fifth round, and Rivera didn't even want to start him in the season finale first.
That was really weird. I still have yet to have somebody explain that to me.
I had Phil Longo on the radio show. He was the OC at Carolina
Yeah.
for Howell's 3 years. And, he likes Zampese. You could tell, like, he implied, like, Zampese's a fan of Howell's and that would be a good working relationship. I think we might know more when we find out if Zampese ends up being the OC on Howell, on what they really intend to do. But I don't know. I mean, I think ultimately you're going to end up with a Brissett or a Bridgewater or a Dalton, and they'll have Hal as the idea going in to be the week 1 starter in 23. But if they realize he's not ready, they have a team that may not be an 11-win roster, but it's a 9 or 10-win roster with better quarterback play. And given that Ron's got to probably win next year to have any chance of sticking around, it could be a Brissett. It could be a Dalton. It could be a Keenum. Again, that opens up, in 23. But I guess the betting favorite would be Howell. I'd agree with that.
And that would be nice. I mean, you can do a whole lot more with the roster if you've got a quarterback on a 5th-round deal. And also, I mean, I don't know what you thought about Howell coming out, but I mean, he wasn't a 5th-round pick until he was a 5th-round pick, right? I mean, before all the weapons were gone, people had him as a 1st or 2nd-round guy.
But he wasn't, Doug. But he went in the 5th round.
Well, I mean that's true.
There are other quarterbacks a year and a half or 2 years earlier were projected really high. Where he went is what the league thought about him. It doesn't matter. I mean, he's going to have a chance to prove everybody wrong, but it's very rare that you take a quarterback in the 5th round and he ends up being your franchise quarterback. Very rare. Most of the franchise quarterbacks come in the top half of the 1st round, not even just the 1st round. So, I like his talent. I wasn't a big fan of Hal coming out, but, watching him in that Dallas game in the preseason, he's got arm strength that we haven't swill we didn't see with Heineke. He's got the same mobility. You can tell he's a competitive SOB, which I kind of like. Will he have the offensive line? Will he have the coordinator? Will he have the staff around him to succeed? I don't know. I mean, I've gotten to the point where I'm not so sure about anybody with this current staff. We don't even know who the OC is. And I'm not a Ron Rivera hater by any stretch of the imagination. I think he's a decent coach. He's not a great coach, decent coach, but it would be the best of every world if Sam Howell, as a 5th-round guy on a rookie deal, turned out to be the real deal next year and that they got it right on him on a rookie deal. It'd be fabulous. But I wouldn't bet on it at this point.
Oh, do we look at Ron Rivera in the wrong light as far as his coaching style? I mean, is he more of a delegator than maybe? I think we put a lot on Rivera, right, as for the decisions he makes. But to me, it's starting to feel more and more like, like he lets the Martys do their particular jobs. And I think to that point, the reason that I have no idea why he didn't want to start Howell on the last game, but I also don't believe it's because Heineke went and said, hey, let him get the shot. I mean, Mayhew scouted him and drafted Howell. I'm sure he went to Ron and said, hey, what's going on here?
Yeah, I think he told me at one point last year when he was on with me on radio once a week that he's definitely more of a hands-off CEO type as a head coach. He didn't use those words, but he said that his role is different than it was in Carolina. There's no doubt he has delegated a lot more to Jack Del Rio, Scott Turner for the first few years because he is responsible for a lot more in Washington than he was in Carolina. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing at this point. Look, they've been an average team average to less than average in his first 3 years. And there's no threat of like a big time breakout season at this point in year 4 when he thought, there was a chance for that in year 3. Until we know what the quarterback situation is, you have to assume in that division going in, they'll be picked to finish last.
You, I think, were with me a couple of years ago about the trade up for Fields. I still think that's one of the biggest mistakes that they've made in his tenure here. I know that he has tried to swing big, but they could have had him. I mean, the Bears were one
Well,
spot behind them. All they had to do was give up the next round pick. And of course, that would have been the Dobson pick, I suppose. But you give up whatever it takes to get quarterback, right?
yeah, but I don't know if we can say for sure that they would have been able to move up into, it was the Giants' position. Chicago moved up in that trade with the Giants. The Giants may have preferred to trade with Chicago than Washington. We may not have gotten Fields. We don't know that they didn't inquire. I mean, remember, there was some reporting at the time that they were interested in moving up. I think it was for Fields. I've had other people tell me it was for Lance, but Lance went third overall, right? I think San Francisco traded up to 3.
Or
So
2 or 3.
yeah, the Fields thing, like with Justin Fields, let's just say if Chicago decided they loved, Bryce Young and they were going to move on from Fields, I think they should consider that, because you could play football like Philadelphia's played football, next year and the year before. Fields is a great runner. He's every bit the runner that Hurts is. He's got a big arm. I know that he's been inaccurate. Big difference, of course, between Philly and Washington is Philly has arguably the best offensive line in football, but with, a rookie deal quarterback, you could invest heavily into that offensive line. Fields would be very intriguing to me. I mean, I don't know if he's the right answer or the wrong answer, but he'd be much more interesting in terms of the upside than what they've had.
Are you surprised? It's been kind of quiet now on the offensive coordinator front. And I mean, I know they've done some interviewing. I'm not necessarily sure any of those guys are going to take the job. I know Eric Bieniemy's been floated around. I like the idea of Bieniemy. I think people poo-poo the idea, like, why would he leave and come? Well, you would leave to go somewhere where you're the obvious play caller, because under Andy Reid's shadow, you're just going to always be under Andy Reid's shadow. People will always assume that Andy Reid's the guy that is the reason for all the success. Where are you on offensive coordinator, and do you think they'll be stuck with Zampese?
I think that right now Washington's a tough destination because of the ownership situation.
Sure.
Like the enemy and some of these others have options. I mean, by the way, one of his options is perhaps to just go back to Kansas City and be the OC for Patrick Mahomes and another, year of being a Super Bowl contender. But I think the idea for Bieniemy in particular is to get out from under the shadow of Andy Reid and design an offense and call plays and prove that he can do that without Andy Reid. But I think this isn't number one destination for him. I don't think it is. I mean, there's something attractive about this place with respect to the roster, like you talked about earlier, but you still have a big unknown at quarterback. And really, you may be going to work for a lame duck head coach. And I think that's their challenge. Not to mention that internally, there's the possibility that they're working on, a budget freeze, a spending freeze. I mean, it's very possible that Dan and Tanya have said, don't do anything. Just elevate Zampese, give him a little bit more money, and let the new owner, decide what he wants to do. So that's a possibility as well. But I think outside looking in is, well, what's the deal in Washington? Is he selling the team? Who's he going to sell it to? Is the guy that I'm going to be working for in Rivera going to be there a year from now? Is he going to be there in 3 months? So I think a lot of that, goes into the consideration of Washington for all of these guys, which is why I come back to Zampese or maybe Pat Shurmur, because he doesn't have a job.
First round, let's take a quick look ahead to the draft. First round, what is the biggest need for this team? To me, it's obviously there's big need in the line and the secondary. I think they could still use a cornerback. What do you like there in the middle of the first round for this team?
Well, quarterback is number one priority in the offseason for me. I keep swinging until I land on one. I'm a fan of Anthony Richardson. I know a lot of people aren't. And I watched him when he's looked really bad. And I've watched him when he's looked really good. At 6'4", 235, he's almost like a bigger, stronger version of Lamar Jackson with a big arm, just inaccurate. I don't think he's going to be there at 16 personally, so it doesn't matter. But if they love a quarterback in the draft, I think they should be aggressive, just like we talked about with Fields from a couple of years ago. I think they should be aggressive and they should go get a quarterback, because there's no chance, Doug, that anybody out there is like convinced that Sam Howell is the answer. It's one thing to be convinced that giving him a shot is the best solution for now, rather than, paying for Derek Carr or trading for Aaron Rodgers or whatever the possibilities are, or trading up for one of the quarterbacks. but nobody can be convinced that he's actually the franchise quarterback, the future of the franchise. We're not going to know that until this time next year at the very earliest, probably. So I would keep swinging at quarterback. Other than that, it's best player available with the idea of offensive line, needing upgrade, and they'll have some options. Corner, they'll have some options. Linebacker, fewer. And, all the analytics guys hate linebackers in the first round anyway. And, you can't discount if Deron Payne isn't re-signed, D tackle. If there's somebody there that's a dominant interior defensive tackle. I would not pass on the only positions you pass on in this draft definitively at 16 are wide receiver and running back, right?
That's right. Well, yes. And that's
just
because I would never draft a running back in the first round.
Well, yeah. And you don't need one anyway. So it's best available player at all of the, but you don't need a receiver, clearly.
Yeah. And I would suggest that if DN pass rusher is the best position available, listen, if they sign Payne, then there's really no chance, I think, that they sign Montez Sweat. And I don't know that they necessarily think Montez is worth another deal or contract at this place anyway. So I wouldn't pass on pass rusher either.
Yeah, I hope that they think Montez Sweat is worth a contract extension, because I think he's a really good player with a chance to continue to get better, as I feel that way about Payne. And I think the real wild card is Chase Young. I don't know what they think of him. The talent's unmistakable. Yeah, the talent's unmistakable. But you're right. If there was a dominant edge pass rusher at 16, and he was clearly their best player on their board, they should take him. They absolutely should take him. Wide receiver, not so much, I don't think, at 16. They did that last year. They've got a surplus of solid wide receivers. But to me, the number one priority of this offseason is still quarterback.
Are you as sold as the rest of the fan base, I guess, that linebacker is a great need? And if so, I floated this out the other day, would you prefer a guy like Tremaine Edmonds for, say, $14 million a year, or bringing back Cole Holcomb at, say, $7.5, $8 a year?
Yeah, I was thinking about Edmonds the other day. That's interesting that you brought him up, because he's turning into a monster at the position. And, this is close.
Third best PFF coverage rankings for last season.
I didn't even know that. Plus, he's closer to home here. I don't know. Again, I wonder what they're going to be able to do in free agency until this team's sold. Really, Doug. I don't know what they're going to be able to do with Deron Payne. I don't know what they're going to be given license to do. Now, the difference with somebody like Payne franchise tagging him is they don't start to pay him until game checks, because it's all base salary. Going out and signing Tremaine Edmonds to a $14, $15, $16 million deal is going to include a lot of guaranteed money that the Snyders are going to have to put in escrow. So that's why I think that this offseason is interesting, because they may be limited in a lot of the things that they can do. But as it relates to linebacker, I do like Holcomb. I hope he's healthy. I hope he's back. And I also think they still need help at linebacker.
If you could only sign, we're looking in the future a little bit, you could only keep Sweat or Payne, which one do you prefer?
I don't want to make that choice. I love them both. But I think because you have John Allen on the inside, if you force me to take one, I'd keep Sweat. But I'm not. Here's what we don't know that they know. I've heard a lot of people say, contract year, Deron played great in contract year, but you can't trust that moving forward after you sign him. Remember Albert Haynesworth? Well, Albert Haynesworth was a bad guy and was with another team. They know Deron Payne. They know whether or not this was just, a one-year aberration more than we do. I would guess that it wasn't. I would guess that he is, maturing, 26, coming into his prime. And the combination of him and Allen, and perhaps Big Phil Mathis in rotation, gives them the, moving forward, if they have that, the most impressive interior defensive line in the league. I'm not saying that either one of them is a top 2 or 3 D lineman, but in combination, it's the best combo in the league. I loved watching the two of them disrupt things this year and play well together and make it easier for everybody else on that defense. And I don't know. Sweat too is. I wish Sweat just finished it more often.
That's right.
He's so close, and I wish like the other thing too. And I haven't said this. Remember his rookie year, how many deflected balls he had, at the end of that season as they were making a run. He's big and he's long and he's athletic. I'd love to see him be more disruptive. He's a great run stopper, though. And I think he can become a really good pass rusher. And I think he's already a good pass rusher. But, numbers wise, I think he can become that. It's a hard choice.
It is. And you made a great point about Payne. And I've said this a bunch too when people ask me about the contract year. He's 25 years old, right? Like, so, I mean, I think that has more to do with it than anything else, is he's still just figuring it out. And I think he's got more room to climb. Kevin, what about, Coach Curl, if you will, made waves this week when he suggested that Cam should be getting a 7-year, $100 million deal. That would put him way up towards the top of the safeties. Do we overvalue Curl, or has the rest of the league just not caught up to how good Curl is?
I mean, I can't see giving him Derwin James money. I really can't. But, the truth is, and all of us, you, me, and those that follow you and follow me, we all watch every game and we realize what a difference it was this year when he wasn't out there. And I think he is a good player, and I think he has a chance to be a really good player. They've actually drafted some really good players, middle to late rounds. Curl being the leader of that pack. I hope they can get a deal done that doesn't cost them, Derwin James kind of guaranteed money. And what's his AAV? Something like 19 or 20 a year, something like that.
Yeah, it's right in that.
And I actually think the question that is actually more applicable right now is, if you could only sign one in this offseason, extend Curl or extend Payne. That's an interesting conversation. Again, I'd like to do both of them and worry about Sweat and Chase Young down the road as the cap continues to increase. Curl's important. And here's the thing. The difference is you don't have anybody behind Curl right now. You think you have somebody. You drafted Phil Mathis to replace Payne after this season. That's why they drafted him in the second round. With that said, if you ask me who's the better player, I would say Daron Payne is the better player. I think Cam Curl is super important to the defense and to the team. But, we've been searching for A and A+ players for a while, and now they have some, and Daron Payne's one of them.
There's no doubt. And I agree with you. I like the safety pairing that they have there now with Curl and Forrest. The nice thing is, and I know you brought this up on the radio show, between the two of them, you technically don't have to worry about Curl till next year. So getting the deal done this year would just be a nicety a la Jonathan Allen, Terry McLaurin.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to make the mistake of letting them get to free agency like with Payne. You'd be in the same situation next year. Payne had the 5th-year option. You don't get that with the 7th rounder, obviously. Look, we've been in this, following this organization for long enough. When you have a player that's ascending and you believe that player, and you want that player to be a big part of your future, you do it sooner, not later. That lesson's been learned around here a few times with Cousins, with Sheriff. It's about to be learned, hopefully not the hard way, with Payne. So they should have as a priority getting Curl. If they believe Curl is as good and as impactful, and the numbers don't lie, that when he wasn't there, they were worse on defense than without him, they may say that's coincidence. I've seen a lot of numbers like average points given up at 25 without him, 18 with him. Yards are much lower with him. But in some of those games, the offense turned the ball over. There were short fields. Some of that at times can be misleading. They know what he is. Jack Del Rio knows what he is. And if they really believe that he is like a top flight safety, you get it done now. You don't get put into that bind a year from now where you're forced to go down the franchise tag path to keep him.
I'll steal your line on that one. Always better to be proactive than reactive, which this franchise hardly ever is.
Yeah, the franchise has never been good at identifying talent and then retaining talent. They just for so long weren't very good at that. And then throw on top of that, a lot of the times they weren't very good at developing talent. That is the trifecta of bad. So yeah, I mean, you want to be able to, and maybe Cam Curl snuck up on them a little bit, because if they really saw this coming, they should have done it last year, and it would have surprised everybody.
Right.
Clearly, if they'd done it. But that's the thing, and especially at key positions, and that's a key position in today's NFL. And by the way, he's very trustworthy back there for the coaching staff. I know that. But yeah, you don't want to be in this position where we're talking about him in the same way we're talking about Payne a year from now.
What franchise is more frustrating, Kevin, the Commanders or the Wizards?
Oh boy, I think over the years the Commander, this skins much more so than the Wizards. I mean, it's close. The Wizards have been frustrating. I had Wes Unseld Jr. on the radio show this morning.
Yeah,
he was great, by the way. I actually think that they have talent on that team. I'm into the Wizards. I'm one of the few that actually cares about the team and watches most of the games. And I actually think they are as talented as they've been in 5 or 6 years, since that 2017 team. And if they're healthy, I think they're going to be in the playoffs if that's what they want. If they don't deal everybody at the trade deadline, for next week, they can't win in the East with, Boston and Milwaukee and Brooklyn, although I just saw that Kyrie Irving apparently wants to be traded. But they could get themselves into a best-of-7 series as one of the top 8 teams in the East, even if it's in a play-in format. I don't know who's more frustrating, Doug. It's both. I mean, we've been in, for my 2 favorite pro teams in town, it's been a long time. We haven't won a playoff game in 17 years. 17 years.
It's unbelievable.
It's ridiculous. And the Wizards haven't won, a conference semifinal in 21, 23, 44 years now. So, yeah, 43 years if it doesn't happen this year.
Let's take just a couple of minutes to talk about the big game. Who do you like in the Super Bowl?
I like Kansas City. And I've been a fan of Philadelphia going back to before the season started. I had a gut feel that they were going to be really good this year if Hurts even took a small step forward. They're just loaded. I mean, we saw that in the preseason. Their roster was just loaded. And, it was all about Hurts. 6 months ago, nobody thought for sure that Jalen Hurts was going to be the Philadelphia quarterback in the 23 season. Now they're going to have to figure out how to pay him and keep him. But I'll take Mahomes over Hurts. And given the 2 weeks and assuming that some of those receivers are back, I just think Mahomes is so special. I mean, and I think he proved that in the AFC title game. And I like Kansas City's chances. I think they're hungry for it too. They got that one a couple of years ago over San Francisco, and they just assumed it would continue to happen. And they lost to Tampa Bay, and they got thumped in that game. And then they lost at home last year in the AFC title game after, a 21-3 first half lead. And they were doubted a little bit. And they're not great defensively, but they played better defensively in the postseason. I like Kansas City.
I mean, crazy how much the narrative would have changed if they lost that game last week, right? And that'd been 2 straight losses at home to Burrow. And then, you're kind of having this Mahomesian discussion where it's like, do you prefer to go all of the games and lose, a la, LeBron? I mean, I know he's got championships. Or do you like Michael Jordan, who went to 5 and won 5 or 6? That's the conversation we'd have had if they lost last week, right? It's like
it would have been an interesting conversation about Mahomes. Now, they would have had the excuse that he wasn't 100%.
Sure.
But you're right. If he had lost 2 straight AFC title games at home to Joe Burrow, the conversation would have been about, is Joe Burrow the best quarterback in the league? And I think really the answer, after Sunday, before Sunday, Mahomes is at here, and then we can talk about, Burrow
That's right.
and Allen and, Herbert and the rest of them that come. But Mahomes is all-time great in terms of his talent. I talked about recently on my show. I can't think of, and maybe you can, I can't think of an NFL player that's been a lock Hall of Famer faster than Patrick Mahomes. If he never took another snap, he's in the Hall of Fame first ballot.
It's easy, Kevin. All the Commanders have to do is draft a Mahomes type guy. I mean, that's as simple as it is, right?
I'm sorry?
I said it's easy. If the Commanders would just draft a Mahomes type quarterback, they'd be in fine shape.
Well, they need, and we wouldn't worry about the uniforms of the name. I don't know. Maybe. But if it had happened before, we'd be into Mahomes a lot.
That's right.
But they've never, remember, Andy Reid traded up for Mahomes when nobody was talking about Mahomes at that level. So
that's right.
It takes somebody in your organization that can identify talent and then go out and figure out a way to acquire it and secure it and eventually retain it. We've never been good at that, ever.
No, we haven't.
Yeah.
Kevin, I appreciate it, man. Always, you're the best.
Thanks, Doug, so much. Good to see you.
Okay. Appreciate it.